cost of living is skyrocketing, political polarization at an all-time high, and we are at the voting booth for the 5th time in under 4 years. But there is hope. Educating ourselves in the ways of the political system around us may help us make a change. Welcome. You are listening to the Israel's Got Politics podcast with Rafi Gantshar and Azi Fein. As everybody knows, the political situation in Israel is not great. Our politicians are currently caught in a zero-sum game for control of the country, and we, the citizens, are caught in between. What can we do? We can learn. We can learn about the political system, we can learn what's going on, and we can learn how ultimately we can be the ones to take control back to our hands. This is Israel's Got Politics. Welcome to our journey.
Rafi, I am really excited to be here with you.
Pleased to be here with you, Azi. Really, it's really exciting, I think, that we can be doing this podcast together. And I'm sure there are many people in the audience who can gain from learning about the political system. I know definitely I can gain more from educating myself a little bit further.
One thing that I'm really hoping to get out of this podcast is to really educate myself more. And I think to go on this journey with an audience, with a crowd, with a following here, to really gain perspective from the audience, from guests that we're going to have on, and from each other, and really just to go through this journey all as one to better the nation.
Yeah, completely agree. This is going to be exciting. It was a little bit coincidental. I think that this podcast, the start of the podcast, happened to coincide with the Knesset dispersion itself, right? But
great timing.
But great
couldn't have been better.
Listen, no time to learn politics like the present. We're all going to be voting for the future of our country in about 3 months now, right?
Something like that, yeah.
And so we gotta know what the heck we're doing, don't we?
Yes, I don't understand how people are going to vote if it's not understood what they're voting for, what Israel's top problems are, who the political figures are, what are the different parties.
Yeah, that's something we want to learn about. We have a great show for you guys today. We're gonna do a few things. First of all, we pre-recorded an interview with the one and only Barak Schechter. Barak, for those of you who are who do not yet have the privilege to be familiar, he is a local community activist turned politician here in Beit Shemesh, my hometown. And so Barak is going to come on and we actually had a wonderful conversation with him. I think he spoke to us about quite a few things, didn't he, Azi?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I think he added a lot to the table. And really, I think this episode is really just going to shoot us into a great series of learning about politics, how to get into it yourself, how to make the right vote.
Right, so that's what I love about Barak, right? Barak came onto this show with a perspective of, look, I'm American. I came to this country knowing nothing, and I had to educate myself. And I love that. I love that approach because a lot of people here, they say, look, I don't understand politics. What can I do? And Barak said, I'm going to do something. And he learned about the system, and he became active. He made local change. I think a lot of people around here have tremendous gratitude for some of the things he was able to push forward, even from outside of city council. But anyway, that's going to be very exciting. He's going to give us a few tips about how to do that, about how to go about learning for yourself what's out there. We're going to try and do a few things every week, okay? First of all, we're going to have an interview, right? As we said, we have Barak Schechter coming on. We're going to try to have every week a segment, 5 political things that happened this week that perhaps you may have missed. And we are going to try every week to discuss one political party that will be up for election in the coming elections. What do you think of that, Azi?
And or a political figure, I'll add.
And or political figure, yes.
I think there's a lot to discuss on this podcast, on this platform. I think we're just gonna have amazing conversations with each other, with incredible guests. Rafi, let me ask you though, what brought you to create this podcast and to build this platform?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I mean, look, I've always had a passing interest into politics. And that developed more recently. But I remember as a kid, we lived in Wesley Hills in New York, in the United States. But it was there was a funny political situation going on there, where the mayor's buddies kept on winning re-election, and my father one day stood up and said, "I've had enough of this." And he was a religious Jew in a largely non-Jewish area, but he said, "I'm going to run, and I'm going to win." and he ran and he became the village trustee, one of 5. He and his running mate. So all of a sudden there was opposition, and I don't know what gave him the courage to do that, but all I know is that several years later, as he was halfway through his term, we made Aliyah. He said, "No, I'm dropping all this and I'm going to Eretz Yisrael, going to Israel," and that once again was very impactful to me, because that said, forget about all the glamour of politics. The reason I really went into politics is because my values is to make a difference, and if my values will call me elsewhere, then that's where I'll go. And that was huge for me. And so we came to Israel, and I began to be very frustrated. A lot of us are, right? I began to look at our elected officials, and I'm like, what's going on here? What's going on? These are not guys that are putting their values, that are injecting their values into the politics. These are guys that are perhaps injecting their politics into the values, right? And eventually I said, you know what? The only way that I will ever know how to make a difference within the system is to understand it. That's, as they say, know thy enemy, right? So I wouldn't call the politicians my enemy, right? Most of them, at least, are Jews, and every Jew's a brother, and every Jew's a friend. But at some point I said, we have to familiarize ourselves with what's going on if we're going to change it. What about you, holy brother? How did you, what road led you to this crazy thing we're doing?
Well, the reason that I am very interested and passionate as well about this podcast and super excited about it, I have a Zionist background as well. I made Aliyah when I was 7 years old, forced by my family, I might add. I was a very stubborn...
Shout out to your dad.
Oh, yeah. I was a very stubborn 7-year-old. I'm still stubborn today, but you can imagine a 7-year-old even more. And I did not want to make Aliyah at all. I remember, I don't really remember so well, but my mom would remind me very often that I was scared to die in the army. That was my biggest fear, and I did not want to move to this country, leaving my friends, leaving my family, just leaving everything and coming to this new weird place. And then a bunch of years later, I was in high school, and I started a podcast with a friend of mine. You can find that Lions for Zion.
With Moshe, right?
Moshe Schwartzberg, yes. Shout out. We started that podcast, and we managed to do that until I went to Mechina, which is a pre-military training program. The podcast, we talked about Zionism, anti-Semitism, the history of Israel, all different subjects. We had guests on as well. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed doing that. And then we had to take a break from that because I just, it didn't work out. Wasn't in high school anymore. I also had plenty of time in high school because of Corona. So that really kept us busy. But I wouldn't say my whole life, but I think the past few years of my life have been very impactful on my Zionist and Jewish identity. And I think politics is a very important part of that, which I've actually only started to understand more recently and discover my political interests, I would say. I think that, I have a very strong Zionist and Jewish identity, and I want to make Israel better in any way that I can. And slowly I've been realizing that at the end of the day, the political figures are the ones making the top decisions that affect, the course of history and, the future of the country. And I think I need to learn that more. And I think that, Rafi, I think you have more political knowledge than I do. But it's something that I've been following for a while and definitely have an interest, and we will learn more together.
Listen, man, it's a drop in the sea, right? Hey, what I find, something can I remark something that inspired me from your story?
Go for it.
Something, I know you as a go-getter, and as you mentioned, you're very young, right? You just graduated high school a couple years ago. 2 years ago, you had.
Let me just add in for the audience who might be curious about what I'm up to today. Actually, I am 20 years old, graduated from high school 2 years ago, and I'm drafting in 25 days from today to the Givati Brigade. Givati!
Shout out to my brother who was also in Givati.
Yeah, looking forward. Defend the country, defend the history, defend the name of Israel.
Completely. Well, look, something that really inspired me about your story is that you discussed coming to Israel as a scared 7-year-old who said, I don't want to go to the army because I'm afraid of dying. And over the years, that seems to have changed, but dramatically, you've become like the uber Zionist. I'm seeing your posts. I'm seeing your posts all over the place, and I'm seeing those photos of you out in the hills, and then down in Hebron, and going up to the Temple Mount, and just active. And you are drafting to a heavy hitters unit in a couple of months. How does it make you feel now, though? Now, looking back at your 7-year-old self and saying, I'm done in the army.
If I could take a time machine and go back and, talk to my younger self, getting on the plane, or even before getting on the plane, just slap him across the face and be like, just go. Just go. Shut up and just go.
Take the plunge. Do it.
Yeah.
Completely. Okay, well,
let's just dive into it.
Yeah, completely.
Let's do it.
Completely.
I'm really excited. Looking forward.
So am I, my friend. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. We're going to air our first segment. Okay, we're going to discuss 5 political things that happened over the last, it's our first episode, we'll say the last couple of weeks. Afterwards, we're going to have our interview.
Let's do it.
Here we go, brother. Here are 5 political things that have happened in the last week or 2 weeks that you may have missed. 1. Political unity. The recent unification of 2 parties in the anti-Bibi bloc made big headlines, and with good reason. Yes, Gideon Sa'ar's right-wing New Hope party vehemently opposes participation in a Netanyahu-led coalition. However, finding the necessary common ground in security-related matters with a more centrist blue and white was no easy task. But why was such a compromise necessary? According to members of the new faction, the purpose is to create yet a 3rd candidate for the coveted position of Prime Minister. BNL leader Benny Gantz strives to form a center-right coalition following the elections, something Lapid is incapable of due to a Haredi veto. For now, it appears that the parties have managed to put aside their differences for the sake of unity. But how long can this actually last? Number 2. This leads us right into our next topic. What exactly transpired between Yair Lapid and Haredi media star Menachem Toker? According to journalist Amit Sedal, Prime Minister Lapid firmly believes that the aforementioned Haredi veto of Yesh Atid is enforced by the political elite, yet a downer to the Haredi public. According to this borderline comical scoop, Lapid requested that Toker form his own Haredi party and run for Knesset. The endgame? Broadening his prospects for forming a coalition when all is said and done. Allegedly, Toker even expressed his readiness to do so, claiming support from no less than Chief Rabbi Lau himself. The rabbi's response? Absolute denial. Toker and the Prime Minister's office have yet to issue a reply. Number 3. The Metro. When will Tel Aviv finally have an underground train system? If you live or work in the heavily congested Don Block, our news for you today isn't great. Shortly prior to the dispersion of Knesset, an attempt was made to pass the Metro law. The object of the bill was to provide additional funding to the awesome project that would enhance all our lives, as well as prioritize it over similar ones. But with partisan politics striking yet again, a consensus was unable to be reached and the bill fizzled out. How could the opposition vote against a bill that is so important and so apolitical? Their claim? The bill is being used to provide jobs and funding for ignorant contractors who will only harm the infrastructure. On the other hand, they had proposed supporting the bill in exchange for allowing former Yamina MK Amichai Shikli to join the Likud. So what's really going on here? Nobody's sure. However, one thing is certain. The Gush Dan commuters will continue to sit in traffic for the time being. Number 4. Visas. Ayelet Shaked's days as our Minister of Internal Affairs may be numbered, but she was determined to bring about a very impressive achievement. A deal is currently brewing with the Americans that will allow free travel between the countries with simply an Israeli passport. However, this too fell victim to our vicious political partisanship. The deal required that a law be passed by the Knesset. Again, simple enough, right? If only. The opposition refused to support the bill, and for now Israelis will continue to wait in line for their visas. So why did the Likud propose to veto this? According to Likud MK Yoav Kish, supporting the bill as is was not practical, because it would require 3 whole laws to be passed that would infringe on the privacy of Israeli citizens. It's important to see the entire package, said the lawmaker on Sunday evening. When we return to power, we will pass it. Number 5. The party funding law. Chok mimun miflagot, we say in Hebrew. Or in English, you're doing what with my money? Originally legislated in 1973, the law states that each party in the Knesset is to receive taxpayer money in order to cover campaign expenses. How much money, you ask? The original law states that each party is to receive 1,375,000 shekels for each member of Knesset currently serving. Collectively, this amounts to 165 million shekels out of the public coffers. But the Shanda doesn't stop there. Despite the Knesset's inability to pass vital laws shortly before breaking for elections, remember, the metro, the visas, guess what passed with only 5 dissenting votes? In its final moments, the 24th Knesset arrived at the near-unanimous agreement to increase this amount to 1.6 million shekels each, amounting to a whopping 195 million shekels. As this will be the 5th time in 2 years, the Israeli taxpayers paid out almost 1 billion shekels. It's no wonder many Israelis can no longer afford to buy bread. We're busy buying ads for politicians. Okay, good morning. We are on now with local activist turned politician, Barak Schechter. Good morning, Barak. Thank you for coming on to the show this morning.
Good morning, and thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, pleasure's ours. Want to start by first of all, once again, thanking you for taking the time out to come and speak to us and speak to our audience. I wanted to ask you, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up in Israel, and how did you end up ultimately joining the political scene here?
Well, first of all, I was born in Israel, and when we moved back to the States, I grew up right outside Washington, D.C., where a lot of politicians used to stay by our house for Shabbat, and I got a little glimpse of how, Israeli politicians work. I remember my mom used to throw them out for lighting a cigarette in the living room, and I sort of got to know the Israeli society and how, or I thought the way Israel works, and throughout the years, I just became much, active in local. I remember at 15 years old, the mayor of when we moved to New Jersey was running, and I just held up signs on the main street because I wanted to make a difference. And then, I came back to Israel at 20, and wherever I was, I wanted to understand the issues in my town where I lived, whether it was Zichron Yaakov, whether it was Beit Shemesh. And slowly but surely, I injected myself more into the issues. I'm a big believer in the people, that the people have the power, that the people vote in, our politicians. Our politicians are public servants that work for us, and ultimately they answer to the people. And I believe that we could really make a difference, if we care about the issues and we inject ourselves in the issues. A few years ago, I helped my sister with her campaign to run for a judge, and I really realized that.
Where was this?
This is in Manhattan, and now she's a Supreme Court justice. And I realized that we, the people, the regular people, have a big voice if we decide to use it for the good, and that's what we have to do is learn about issues and tackle them, and just believe that you have the power to make a difference.
Wow, so it sounds like you have always been a guy with your finger on the pulse of what's going on locally. What really can you go back to those first moments when you were holding up that sign outside of when during those elections? What motivated you to do that? What did you see in what was going on that made you say, hey, this is something I want to get involved in?
Well, what really motivates me is justice and what's right. And if I see there's something is wrong with the system, or something, if there's policies that are being pushed that are wrong for the people, that might be right for a few politicians, I'm going to raise my voice. And whether that has to do with a clean city, or that has to do with as they say, kombinot, well, I'm sure that will be explained later on. But I think that it's important.
If you've lived in Israel long enough, you've seen no shortage of kombinot,
yes,
as they say.
Yes, absolutely. But the whole purpose is that you have to have your eye on what's right and what's wrong, and you have to run after justice. And I really believe that that's what we're here for, is to try to fix up society and make it run more smoothly, and do what's better for the people. So I just was focused on that, and it became more of a life mission in a way.
Wow. Wow. So that's, I mean, that's a lot of stuff that you've done on the local level. I remember actually here in Beit Shemesh, right? You and I actually collaborated on a project when our city was being overrun by wild dogs. We got together and really, I'd say more or less we managed to clean the city up, right?
Yeah, we did. We worked really hard. We worked hard with the city vet, and it wasn't a priority of our city as well. And it actually became a little bit of a national story as well. But the point is that's a clear example of coming together for the citizens. I still feel at that time there wasn't even a city dog catcher. Every city has to have a runner. And I remember running through the fields, thorns stuck in my leg, and I knew I'm not hired to be the dog catcher, but someone has to do it. Someone has to do it.
And this is, I'm sorry for interrupting, but this is, if I understand you correctly, this was completely as a volunteer, right? You weren't receiving a salary from the city. You didn't have political connections that you were receiving benefits from in the city. This was just pure goodwill.
Yes, it's just doing what you think is right to help the residents of the city. And people were taking their exercise walks with brooms in their hands. And people really lived in fear. And that's not ideal. That's not the way it's supposed to be. So if someone's got to get up and run after dogs, I'm going to get up and run after dogs. And it was quite the experience.
Can you walk us through how you learned about politics, how you actually got involved in action? What was the process there that led you to where you are today?
I think the process where I really started getting involved on a local level was before the historic election of Elisa Bloch. There was another current mayor, and there were certain issues that really didn't sit well with a lot of the people, and the elections became it seemed to be a little bit toxic, and I didn't think that was fair or right, and I thought people were very dejected and unmotivated by the toxicity. And I said, this can't be the way it's supposed to be, and I started injecting myself more and more into local issues. It started out with our city Beit Shemesh. It used to be quite dirty, and I remember going to a certain spot and taking a picture and sitting in the filth. I sat there with the National Geographic magazine, and I wanted to prove a point that how disgusting the city is, and I decided to be disgusting myself. And I sat in the garbage and said, look, this city's gross. And from then on, I went to different cities and asked them what their policies were and how they clean up. And since then, I've just been very active in trying to make a difference wherever that is. And it started, with that, and then I was asked to start a party in one of the elections, and then they asked me to be in the list of Bayit HaYehudi. And from there, I've just been constantly working on a local level to get things to be a little bit more transparent and functioning.
Incredible. I just want to go back to that story, the garbage story for a minute. Well, what I really love about that story is that form of activism is something, I've seen it sometimes on videos coming out of the United States or England or whatever, people who put themselves physically into an unpleasant situation in order to represent what everybody's living with in their day-to-day. Well, I haven't seen that so much in Israel. And I feel like what you did sort of really took people by surprise here. It was unique. It was like, wow, somebody's actually sitting in the garbage. Who would do such a thing to themselves? But actually doing it and actually speaking out in a way that is so far been almost unheard of.
Yeah, you don't see it so often here. But I really do believe that optics play a big role in politics and how people react. In Israel especially, there's definitely a lot of emotion when it comes to politics, because there's so much, with religion and state and all this kind of stuff and identity politics. But if you want to get people to understand the issues, you have to actually bring them into the issues. And sometimes that takes sitting in garbage to do so, to really get them to realize how bad we have it. And don't get me wrong, there's been a lot of improvement with the situation in our city. But then again, I would say Beit Shemesh itself, locally, is probably one of the most complicated cities you'll find in Israel. And so, I don't wish the job on anyone, but it is a very, very tough city to manage.
So Barak, let me come back to your experience as somebody who really didn't come from the political fold, right? If I understand correctly, you came from more of a civilian background, and you came and you said, I want to be active, and I want to stand up for what's right. This podcast, that Azi and I have started, is something that we hope can encourage people to learn more about what's going on around them. We feel people really want to, there's a thirst out there. There's a thirst to understand what's going on, to get out there and make a difference. And people are looking for that voice. People are looking to learn, and are looking to understand, and are looking to perhaps become more active themselves. Other than perhaps listening to this podcast or otherwise educating oneself, how would you recommend somebody actually get their foot out there and take the first step towards giving what they have to give, and helping to better our society?
Right. Well, the way I see it is that there's a few different kinds of people in Israel. There are ones that want to make a difference, and there's the majority, unfortunately, who raise their hands and say, "En ma lasot," kacha, this is the way it is, and it's not changing. And believe it or not, every single city has their local municipal, parties, and they have the same parties national. Really, all one has to do is really genuinely care about making a difference. If you really care about making a difference, you go up to that party that resonates with you, that you believe in, and you say, "I want to help." Most of the time, you will not be rejected. Israeli politics will be more than happy to welcome you with open arms and say, "Here, this is what you could do. Go hang up signs. Go talk to the people on the street about issues." And before you know it, you have now injected yourself in the political sphere. All you have to do is want to make a difference and run after it. Like, believe that you can make a difference. Believe that you have a voice, and believe in the people. Believe that the people have a voice. And if you go out there, you're going to make a difference. You're going to move up, and you're going to have a say. And that's really, it's coming from experience. That's what I did. It's just inject yourself in there, believe in causes, and go after them. Don't let anything stop you.
If you can't fight them, join them.
Yeah, in a way, as long as you don't become them.
Well, but about that, I mean, we speak about, a lot of people have this concern that the politics are corrupt. The politics will not enable somebody like me to get involved. What do you say to somebody like that? If somebody's just worried, I'm going to be hanging up posters for some party that I don't really believe in, and I probably never will. How is that going to help better my life and the lives of those around me?
Well, you're only going to hang up posters for the party that you really believe in. If you don't believe in a specific cause or party, then you probably will sit it out, or you'll probably you'll be on the sidelines, and you'll vote for who resonates with you the most. If you really believe you can make a difference, just go and make that difference. Like, make your effort. There is no Israel. It's very easy to inject yourself in the situation, into politics. The question is whether you're influential, whether you're outgoing, whether you have the kochot to bring people with you. Because in Israel, everything, or even in politics, everything is based on how many votes can you bring in, what impact can you make. And listen, when you genuinely believe in a cause, it will show on you. It's going to show. You're not going to look like an actor. You're going to look like someone who really believes. And if you do that and you really believe in that, you're going to you can make a change.
I think a lot of our viewers, a lot of our listeners are in a bit of a how should I say this? A bit of a situation right now, right? Where they look at all the parties out there, and they're like, wow, on the one hand, so many parties, so much to choose from. It's like a breakfast buffet. But on the other hand, they're like, wait a second. This is like one of those really bad breakfast buffets that you don't want to be at, where all the food is a little bit off and a little bit smelly.
They're all dry and stale.
Yeah, exactly. And so you have all this variety in front of you, but none of it's really your flavor. And so, is there really no way for them to get involved? If they can't connect with a political party, if they can't connect with what's currently going on, and what's currently coming from our elected officials, is there anything that they can do?
It's a heavy question. If I'm like going through a tray of French toast and they all look gross, and I keep on like picking some up, I'm gonna find one that's okay. That like I could be like, oh, okay, I'll put that on my plate. And listen, there's a lot of politicians out there who repulse me, really, to abusing that strong word. because for whatever reasons. But there are politicians there who resonate with me, for example. Like, I'm going to give you an example. Abir Kara, right? At this point in Israel, the financial system, if in my opinion, is going to explode one day. I mean, you can't have a majority of the country taking out loans and living in minus. It doesn't work. And that's what's happening right now. People are literally just loan after loan, minus after minus. You know, there's a joke that Israelis constantly talk about money. And it's true, because there's almost like this, there's this feeling that Israelis are they're almost like comfortable being so uncomfortable. Like they'll go travel to Morocco or France, but they'll just get more in minus. And here we have a politician who maybe is part of a party that is a no-go at the present moment. But he's a politician that is the fresh politician who could really make a change economically. I believe security-wise, it's more or less all the same. Most Israeli politicians, even on the left or the right, care very much about security. But right now, Israeli security, in my opinion, is whether families can make it from day to day. The poverty level in Israel is skyrocketing. You could just look at the statistics. More children are living in poverty than ever before. And we have to ask ourselves, how can we survive as a nation if we're poor, if we're just living from organizations? And you need policies that are going to help the average Israeli make it. We are one of the most developed nations in the world with the lowest salaries out of that list of developed nations. That it's inexcusable. Tel Aviv is the most expensive city in the world right now, with the lowest salaries. That can't happen. You're going to have social unrest, which we've seen years before. And then you see Israel turn into a little bit of a police state as well. So the time is now to help Israel economically. The past 20 years of economic policy had definitely helped Israel's economy. Israel is a bustling nation, is doing very well for the top 15-20% of people, right? Mr. Netanyahu did a great job for the 15 to 20% at the top. The people, the middle class, are just becoming lower class. They're not making money, and people aren't surviving, and that's something that really has to be tackled. And the only person that's ready to tackle it is Mr. Kara, Abir Kara.
A little bit of a beginner's question, I would say. How can the average person just learn about each individual politician and the different parties and, learn more about the system itself?
I will interject and say, other than the segments that we're going to air on this show, but yes, please.
I'll tell
Obviously, in addition to that.
I'll tell you, a lot of the way I learn about specific politicians is I literally Wikipedia them. I see what their track records are. I see what they voted on. I see where their background is coming from. I see what their education is. And then once I have that knowledge, I'm a wiki nerd. Like, I'll stop on the highway and Wikipedia a town, up north, because I need to know about it. So I do the same thing with Israeli politicians. Just learn about them, learn what they stand for. And a lot of times you have these people that are in Israeli politics who could be super successful. But the way Israeli politics works is, you're not voting for direct representation. You're voting for a party, and that head of the party is going to decide what level of impact that specific person is going to have. So an example I'll use again, Abir Kara. If you ask me, he should be the next finance minister. And it's a shame. I don't know whether it's good if he stays with his party or another party picks him up. But that's where Israeli politics gets a little dirty and a little confusing. But someone like him could help Israel as a whole. And he was trying to, but he was getting torpedoed because of Israeli politics, because they didn't want the optics of the party that he was in to have a success.
So how do you make the right vote, with all the corruption and with all the balagan, I would say, that goes on within the parties and within the system as a whole? How do you make the right vote?
That's a good question. It's a good question. For one, you vote for what you believe in. You're conscious, you vote. But you have to know that your vote isn't exactly going to be representing all that you want. You could vote for a specific party. There's not going to be one perfect party for you. And that's the problem when you don't have direct representation, when you're not voting directly for a person, which is something that Israel has to look at. The fact is that there needs to be electoral reform. There needs to be a change in the way Israeli politics are run. There needs to be a way that you could vote for a prime minister and you could vote for a party. And it's a problem. When I want to vote for someone who I believe in,
Barak,
I have to vote for the other people in that party who I might not believe in.
A party or a regional representative?
that's something that's should be discussed. You know, there's governors, like, that's a very good question. I can't answer that on the right now. It gets into loads of how do you split up the regions by mates and all. It's very, very confusing, especially when you have, let's say, a national police force. It's very difficult to answer, but there are many, many super talented politicians across the Israeli spectrum who want to make such a difference, who are being held back by their parties. For example, Moshe Feiglin, right? He has some fantastic ideas. Some ideas were I don't believe in, and I remember calling him on it. You know, in a specific meeting. Some things he has that are great, just like Abri Kara. Just some things that Netanyahu have are great, but they also come with a lot that isn't great, and you have to vote for what speaks to you the most, because unless there's direct representation, you're not going to be able to vote fully for policies that you want. You're going to have to settle with Israeli politics.
The problem is, like I mentioned, all the corruption beyond just the parties, the people themselves. I mean, a politician is a politician at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to, make that vote on a person, again, forgetting about the party for a second. How do you trust the person as a politician? How do you know that, okay, he has these things that I disagree with, but he also has this that I agree with, but how do you know that that's true and that he's not going to change his mind the next day?
You don't know.
Sort of like a recent prime minister.
Yeah, you don't know. You have no idea. Well, I'll say that with the recent prime minister, there's no question that Israeli politics a day before elections and Israeli politics a day after elections are two different worlds. The problem is that I don't think Israeli politicians should be promising anything. I think it's important to say, listen, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to do my best to do this. But once you say, I am not going to do this, and you block yourself in black and white, and you go against that the day afterwards, you've just royally disappointed many people who voted for you, which was a problem in recent history. I think that's a big problem, is you lay out the issues, you say, this is what my plan is for these specific issues, and I will do my best. And I have these people who are qualified, and we will do our best. But once you start promising stuff, you have to worry about any politician who's going to promise you things, because you can't. There's no way to know what's going to be the outcome of an election. And it's an issue. And it's an issue by us, the residents, the citizens, who actually buy this stuff and believe it.
Well, Barak, we appreciate very much you joining us today for this podcast. I've been inspired by your work. Definitely inspired me to learn more about what's going on around me. I hope some of our listeners will be similarly inspired. And look, maybe we'll get you on again in the future in our debate segment, because there's a lot that you and I can talk about.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to it.
This is a subject that we could just talk about all day long.
Completely.
Absolutely.
Okay, great speaking with you, Barak.
And you.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely.
Wow. That was powerful stuff. Barak, I have to say, was one of my inspirations to create this podcast, and it was wonderful speaking to him. No, you thought so, Azi?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I've actually had the opportunity to, I know Barak personally, but I don't think I've ever sat with him to talk so much about politics. So it was really interesting to hear, his political views more and more stories from him. So that was cool to hear.
Incredible. Definitely very enlightening. Okay. Well,
Rafi, what can we expect next week?
Next week. Okay, so next week we are going to have on our segments, right? Political things that happened this week. We're going to interview somebody. If you'd like to, listeners, this is your chance to get involved. If you'd like to hear about a specific topic, please mention so. Please mention so on social media or in an email.
israelsgotpolitics@gmail.com. Send any questions, criticism,
comments, requests,
anything.
Awesome. Okay. And so we're going to have on next week, hopefully, we'll have to see, either a segment about the Labor Party, and that is the Israeli Labor Party, or a different party. If you have any specific requests, let us know, and we will see y'all next week.